I'm singer, songwriter, producer Nick DiMatteo, and welcome to Season 8, Episode 24 of Music is Not a Genre, MXG. Thank you as always for watching and listening. This week's topic is girl groups who run the world. Now, as usual, I'm going to keep my introductory kind of housekeeping notes brief because the mid-roll's here. And what I'm going to say about the stuff is that Rec's new singles collection is out. It has been out. I want to thank everybody who's made it such a big success, especially on Spotify. For some reason, my monthly followers have gone up from 2 digits to the mid 4 digits, and that's still a drop in the bucket, but it means a ton. Thank you so much for all of that. If you haven't heard anything from my band Rec, please go to nickdimatteo.com/music, and you'll have all the streaming links and the discography and live pages and all of that stuff. You can figure all that out when you get there. I'd really appreciate that kind of support. That's it for now. Let's go straight into the topic. Again, girl groups who run the world. So if you've been following along, and I believe this is a couple of weeks after these episodes, I did a double episode on boy bands because there was that much information to fit in, and I just couldn't fit it into one episode. And as I was doing it, I thought to myself, well, I should do maybe a bonus episode on girl groups. Well, of course, the girl group research turned out to be more extensive than I thought it would be, thankfully, and that means I'm doing a full episode on girl groups as well. Now, unfortunately, there was not quite as much information in order to stretch this out to 2 episodes, but I will say this is going to be kind of a long one episode. Let's think of it that way, and I'm going to pack in a lot because, again, girl groups are as worthy of coverage as boy bands are. Their history is quite different, and you'll find that out as we get there. Again, one of the reasons I'm doing this is the same for boy bands. I've been a fan of pop music my whole life, and group pop music in particular has fascinated me ever since the Beatles and the Beach Boys, and which were before my time essentially, but even bands after that, and you get into the 80s. And again, watch the boy band episodes or listen to them, and you'll get a good sense of where I come from there. And of course, Who Run the World refers to Beyonce's hit, which of course she was from a major girl group, Destiny's Child, in what I would call the comeback era of the form, and more later on this, and more on Beyonce too, which I'll get to in a second. The show format, just like with the boy bands, I'm going to do a prehistory, then the prehistory, then a modern day history of girl groups by decade, then conclusions. There will be no featured song. I'm just going to roll out with the usual credit music, the theme song to this show. What song could I possibly pick that would match what girl groups do? I don't think it would be fair. And then questions after that. And then, of course, the bonus MXtra at patreon.com/music is not a genre. I will be spotlighting all of the prominent solo artists who broke away from girl groups. I'd argue that although there aren't as many alumna from girl groups as there were from boy bands, the impact they've made on the culture, I believe on the whole, has been far greater. But again, check out the bonus MXtra, patreon.com/music is not a genre to decide for yourself. Sources: Google, Wikipedia, youdiscovermusic.com, and Entertainment Weekly. The same sources as those last couple of episodes on boy bands. Disclaimers, again, similar to the boy band episodes, I will not mention every girl group ever. That would be impossible, but the history will be comprehensive enough to cover every era, every pre-proto era, and all the flavors and changes. I have not and will not ever have time to listen to every song from every great band, and that includes all of these girl groups. But I've listened to enough of a cross-section to kind of give you some recommendations as to what to listen to and some of the songs I prefer, etc. I will be biased, as always, based on my own preferences. I like to say that, and I say that almost every episode, because as I mentioned in the episode on quotes from history, compared to quotes from today, people who position themselves as a voice of authority and do not qualify what they're saying by saying like, well, it's subjective, I have opinions, whatever, are honestly some of the worst purveyors of this to me, and that's not someone I want to be. You're going to disagree with a lot of my opinions, and I love that because I love that kind of conversation, but you might also agree with some, and either way, in either case, they're opinions. They're educated opinions, and I feel like some of them are much closer to an objective truth than others, but in the case of girl groups, I'm going to have some favorites, and you might not have the same favorites, etc. I will not spend a lot of time on the usual discussion and story about the music industry and the executives and managers' abuse of artists, whether it's financially or verbally or textually or anything like that. But of course, that has gone on, and there's actually a lawsuit now with one of the newer girl groups that has something to do with that, I believe. But I like to keep about the music. And then, of course, big disclaimer. As I mentioned before, I found far more info on boy bands, which is why they warranted 2 episodes. And I say that based on my format. I do a kind of a survey summary format of all of the topics that I cover. Somebody could do 35 episodes on any topic that I cover and go that deep. But, this is the show it is. Music is not a genre. It's what I do. That girl groups get done in 1 episode in no way diminishes their importance or their impact in comparison to the boy bands. And final warning, as I said, this will be a longer than usual episode. Again, not quite long enough for 2 weeks, but certainly longer than an average 1-week episode. I'm in the midst of recording it right now, and do not ever practice these. I'm kind of a one-take Willie, so I have no idea how long it's going to be, but it's going to be a little longer. And we'll find out maybe closer to the mid-roll. Okay, let's get into the first section here after the intro, the prehistory. Like with male vocal groups, female choruses have been around forever, as far back as ancient Greece and probably farther back, medieval Europe, particularly the convents. And some of those convents were even famous for their music, especially in Italy. In Renaissance Italy, there was something called the Concerto della Donna, where a girl trio, they were a girl trio. The Concerto delle Donne were a girl trio who had celebrity status in Renaissance Italy. Through the ages, women who worked together also often sang together. Most, if not all, cultures had this. I would venture to say all. When women were working, mourning the death of someone, celebrating, etc., they would often sing together. By the 1800s, as mores started to relax, women more formally gathered in public to perform, and not just in religious groups, etc. Although there were church choirs, there were also secular choirs, clubs, music societies. And like the men, the glee club tradition spread through schools and communities for women too. Early examples of this are the Smith College Glee Club, University of Michigan Women's Glee Club, Radcliffe Choral Society. These are all the 1800s. As I mentioned in the boy band episode, touring African-American vocal groups were popular in the latter half of the 19th century, and that went for women too, as well as mixed gender groups. Later on, as vaudeville rose, lots of female singing acts popped up, often duos and trios, rarely more than that, and very often sisters, very, very often sisters. One example, the Cherry Sisters, who started as a quintet, went to a quartet, went to a trio, went to a duo. Boy, they stuck it out. They were a late 1800s example of a vaudeville girl group that also performed on Broadway, such as it was at the time. Continue, and I will say this about Broadway at that time and at any time other than the last maybe 20 to 30 years, it was probably much more affordable to put on a show, and you didn't need to make as much money to sustain a show. And a lot of shows are closing right now on Broadway and have done for the last several years, couple of decades, because the overhead is ridiculous. Anyway, the Cherry Sisters continued off and on in some form through the 1930s, so probably a 50-year career, so 40 or 50 years. These acts continued through the early 1900s and into our next section. So that was the prehistory of where girl groups come from. Again, similar to boy bands, you have the kind of rural groups and the working groups. You have the religious groups. You have the more formal groups and glee clubs and things like that. You have the vaudeville groups, and some of those performed on Broadway and elsewhere in the touring groups. And now, the prehistory. As radio and recorded music were becoming popular in the 1920s, female singing acts took advantage of both. These were primarily early jazz groups, and again, very often sisters. Some early success stories from the 1920s, 40s. Vocal harmony and radio era. These groups predate modern pop marketing, but established kind of the core DNA of girl groups and female vocal groups in general: tight harmony, emotional delivery, and group identity. More of a group identity than an individual identity, and we'll talk more about that as we get into the history. We have some group called the Brox Sisters, B-R-O-X, and I believe their name was actually Brock, and then they said the Brox. So B-R-O-C-K-S, I guess, and then they shortened it to B-R-O-X. That is similar to how the borough in New York, the Bronx, got its name. It was a Dutch guy named, I want to say Johan or Johannes Bronk, B-R-O-N-C-K, and that was considered, the land he owned up there was Bronx land, which K''S, and then just got shortened to Bronx, the Bronx. The Brox Sisters, now that we're talking about that, my segues are going to be, my tangents are going to be crazy this time because I'm feeling good. Mostly live and radio presence. Not a lot of recording. They did do a series of recordings, but we're talking the 1910s to the 1930s, so the Brox Sisters were pretty darn early. And then you have the 3X Sisters, also known as the Hamilton Sisters. Do not search for that, because all you're going to get is the Broadway show Hamilton. Search for the 3X Sisters, and you're going to get more information on them. They performed 1919 to 1946, very similar to the Brox Sisters, but far more recordings. And then you have the Boswell Sisters. I had never heard of any of these three until last year. I started listening to the History of Rock in 500 Songs. Andrew Hickey, I would recommend that. It's a great podcast. And the theme song for that was sung and recorded by the Boswell Sisters, who performed from 1925 to 1936. Every single from 1931 to 38 hit the top 20. 12 of them hit the top 10. And The Object of My Affection was a number one hit in 1935 on those nascent charts. Then we have one I had heard of before, and many of you may have as well, the Andrews Sisters, whose first run was from 1925 to 1953, and then they broke up and regrouped and all this other stuff. I want to say they're still together in some form, but descendants maybe, but I don't know. I don't remember. This is, again, is a prehistory. This is not an actual girl group. Andrews Sisters, a female vocal group, the 20s through the 50s, the biggest one of these to have success beyond that early era. I mean, spanning the 20s to the 50s, what changes in music? 1938's By Mir bist du schön means that you're grand. Something you may have heard if you know old music. That went number one in 38. And almost every one of their singles hit the top 20 through 1950. The Andrews Sisters were undeniably huge. One of the biggest acts through those couple of eras there. That cannot be overstated. Best known, other than the one I mentioned, which was by Mir bist du schön, Beer Barrel Polka, Roll Out the Barrel, We'll Have a Barrel of Fun. They didn't sound like that. That was the barrel tone. Number 4 in 1939, Beat Me Daddy, A to the Bar. Number 2 in 1940, Boogie Woogie Boogie Boy is probably the one you know. The thing everybody, it's the Boogie Woogie Boogie Wong Company B. Number 6 in 1941, but I think legacy-wise, probably their most famous one maybe. But I also always liked their number 16 hit from 1942, I Don't Sit Under the Apple Tree with Anyone Else But Me. Of course, a lot of people covered that as well, and the one before it. They had several number 1 and other top 10 hits with Bing Crosby, singing with Bing Crosby, including Pistol Packin' Mama, Is You Is or Is You Ain't My Baby, Don't Fence Me In, with Bing Crosby and others. Their own number ones were Shoot Shoo Baby, 1943, Rum and Coca-Cola, 1945, I Can Dream, Can I, in 1949, and I Want to Be Loved in 1950. Again, can't overstate how massive they were. Really the first breakout female group star of the recording era. And you get some more here in the prehistory. The Dandridge Sisters from 1934 to 1940, including Dorothy Dandridge. If you've heard of any Dandridge, it's Dorothy Dandridge. if I could say that right once. The only African-American group here so far. So vitally important for what was to come. Mostly live, but they did quite a few films. They were featured in many films, but they only did a handful of recordings outside of that. And I don't think any of them were hits, although I might have missed something in my research. Then you had the Dinning Sisters from the late 1930s to 1955. Lots of radio, lots of live performances, and quite a few recordings too, starting in 1945. They had 4 top 15 hits in 1947-48, so that was kind of their big peak. And then you had the Fontaine Sisters. I believe originally spelled with an I, but changed to Fontane. 1941-1961, lots of live and radio and television, actually. So they were very transitional. They changed their sound from the early to mid-50s as tastes changed, going from the more sedate style to faster songs, as, rock and roll came in and jump blues and all of that stuff. They had 18 charting hits, including 10 top 40. Their biggest were the Tennessee Waltz in 1951, reflecting their older style, and Hearts of Stone in 1954, which was their only #1 hit and reflecting their later style. These groups established the blueprint for a modern-day female vocal group, blending the vocals together as a single identity, group identity, transitioning from traditional music, more, let's say, white, European-oriented music, to more jazz and jazz-influenced music, and a combination of those two as well. So in the next era, still in the prehistory here, as with the men, some groups were homegrown and others were assembled by labels. The 1950s and 60s. This is where the modern girl group truly emerges as a pop category. Just like with the men and so many other new genres at the time, the music was geared more towards teens and young adults, shifting the paradigm closer to what girl groups would eventually become. And let's note that similar to the beginnings of doo-wop for the men, most of these girl groups were African Americans. Again, also taken up by white women as well. Eventually, there were some mixed race groups, which I didn't mention in the boy bands. Some of those boy bands, not boy bands, but the doo-wop groups were mixed race. The Platters, by the way, were not strictly a boy band. They actually had a female in there, which I found out, unfortunately, after I recorded that episode. There's just some corrections there. But back to this. This, in many ways, the 50s can be considered the peak girl group era. The peak girl group era. Because unlike with the men, who had a couple of peaks, and the one we know of them in particular was the late 90s into the early 2000s. That was the big peak. But there's one now. I would say the first peak girl group, when girl group was defined, was in the late 50s into the 60s. So very different from the boy band trajectory, which really didn't mature into boy bands, so to speak, until the late 1980s. Even the 1980s in general. The first formations and successes for girl groups were in R&B before the music crossed over to pop. So there's just a sampling of the hundreds probably from this era. You have the Chordettes, 1946 to 63, so very transitional, just the way the Andrews Sisters were. So think of it this way. The Andrews Sisters bridged the gap from the very early recording era and jazz to more popular music and big bands, whereas the Chordettes straddled that big band era and lasted through the pop era, the first pop proper girl group era, more geared towards teens. They had many hits, the Chordettes, and in some ways were the true first proto-girl group, including 1954's Mr. Sandman, #1. 1956 is number 18, their cover of Eddie, My Love, and also 1956, Born to Be With You. 1957, number 8, Just Between You and Me. 1958's Lollipop, Lollipop, oh Lollipop, number 2. In 1958, Never on a Sunday, Never on a Sunday, 1961, number 13. And so the Chordettes have to be considered as one of the big kind of proto-girl groups. Another group that actually started in the 1950s but was modeling themselves on earlier music was the Lennon Sisters. One of those legacy groups that started in 1955 and are still performing in some form, changing the lineup as members retired. But, dun-da-da, if I had to pull something out of this episode, one of maybe 10 things as a kind of a teaser, all 5 of the Lennon sisters are still alive. They started performing in 55, and all 5 of them are still alive, and 2 of them still perform in the band. Their big hit was in 1956, number 15's Tonight You Belong to Me. Now we get into bands who shaped how that older style would take on more R&B and morph into the early rock and roll style of female vocal groups. You have a band called The Hearts from 1954 into the 1960s. The top 10 U.S. R&B hit, 1955, Lonely Nights. Their personnel changed enough that by 1963 they recorded under other names like the Poppies, Z-Debs, and the Janettes. Then you have the Teen Queens, started in the 1950s, not sure exactly when they broke up. They also recorded Eddie My Love, and it went to number 22 for them. I believe, I think they were the first one to record it, and that's why the other one was a cover. Then you have the Bobettes from 1955 to 74, quite a run. Mr. Lee, which is a great song, look it up. Mr. Lee went number 6 in 1957. You have the Chantels, 1957 to 1970. And then they reformed in 1999 and are still going strong. Look in My Eyes hit number 14, 1961, but their biggest contribution is that their 1958 song, Maybe, was where the girl group sound first gelled. So look up the Chantels' song, Maybe. You're going to get the identity of what girl groups would do kind of ever after there. It was a mix of doo-wop, rock and roll, and white pop. Martha and the Vandellas, 1957 to 73, one of the more successful girl groups with 6 top 10 hits through 1963 to 67. Heat Wave, Quicksand, Dancing in the Street. I'm not going to sing it. You've heard so many versions. Nowhere to Run to, Baby. I'm Ready for Love. Jimmy Mack, When Are You Coming Back? I mean, those songs are burned in my brain. Martha and the Vandellas are huge. We're absolutely huge. So were the Shirelles. 1957, they went all the way to 82 before they broke up. They were the first from this group to really break out and have sustained success. Will You Love Me Tomorrow, 1961, and Soldier Boy, oh my little soldier boy, 1962. And then you have a group called the Hutchinson Sunbeams from 1957 until, I'm not going to tell you when because something happened when their history, which we'll get to later. Wanda Hutchinson, Sheila Hutchinson, and Jeanette Hutchinson were part of that group. More on them in the next era. Ooh, suspense. The Ronettes, 1959-1967 primarily. Ronnie Spector, of course, is the legend here. They had several top 40 hits, the biggest being Be My Little Baby, number 2 in 1963. Walking in the Rain was number 23 in 1964, but let's not forget 1963's their version of Sleigh Ride hit number 8 from a great Christmas album, probably the first modern day Christmas album that kicked off Christmas in the U.S. as a thing, really, as musically speaking. The Primettes went from 1955 to 1977, but they changed their name fairly early on from the Primettes, prime, great, awesome, top, to another word for prime, supreme. The Supremes. Yes. The Supremes were once called the Primettes. Let's pause here because this band deserves its own freaking episode, which I may do someday. They had 33 top 40 hits. 33 top 40 hits, including 20 top 10 and 12 number 1 hits. The Supremes had 12 number 1 hits. Like the Andrews Sisters, we might forget how successful and dominant they were. Sure, we remember them, probably remember them better than the Andrews Sisters, but yeah, we kind of forget how incredibly dominant they were and sustained through many years. Guaranteed you know at least a few of these number 1s. I'm not going to sing them because there are too many. Where Did Our Love Go? Baby Love. Come See About Me. Stop in the Name of Love. Oh, I could sing all those. Back in My Arms Again. I Hear a Symphony. Kind of, not really. You Can't Hurry Love. You Keep Me Hanging On. I can sing those. Love Is Here and Now You're Gone. The Happening. Don't know them that well. Love Child and Someday We'll Be Together. Know them both very well. They are often ranked as the number 1 girl group of all time. And again, unlike the boy band trajectory, this has never been surpassed in any subsequent era of girl group resurgence. So when we get into the later eras of girl groups, yes, there are some huge ones that elicited some amazing hits and some amazing solo artists, which again, bonus M extra, patreon.com/music is not a genre. I will be talking, of course, about Diana Ross and other solo artists from girl groups, but none of them, the solo artists maybe, but none of the girl groups surpassed, I think, what the Supremes did. They continued to have charting and even top 40 hits through the mid-1970s, years after Diana Ross left in 1970. Then you have the Marvelettes, 1960 to 70. Second girl group to hit #1 ever. Please, Mr. Postman, 1961. Yes, the Beatles covered that. I knew it, I think, even before I heard the Beatles version. It's a great song. Many other top 40 hits, including Don't Mess with Bill, #7 in 1966. The Crystals, 60 to 67, and then reformed in 1970 and are still together. He's a Rebel, 1962. Do Run Run, by the way, He's a Rebel was #1. Do Run Run, #3, 1963. I knew that song, but then Sean Cassidy did a cover of it in like 76, 77, and I liked that version even more because, whatever. Then He Kissed Me, #6, same year. All those three songs I know well enough to sing at least parts of them. That's how prominent the Crystals were. The Chiffons, 1960 to present, still going. They had that #1 hit, He's So Fine, 1963, which, of course, the George Harrison, blah, blah, blah. Look it up if you don't know what I'm talking about. And then One Fine Day, #5, same year, 1963. And they had a few more top 40 hits. The Shangri-Las from 1963 to 68, pretty short run. They were kind of in the second wave, inspired by all of the bands who came before them. They were white. So again, it's as I said, African Americans kind of started the whole like modern day girl group idea. White women would come together and put that together. Leader of the Pack, hello, 1964, #1 hit. Wasn't just a McDonald's commercial song. Remember Walking in the Sand in 64, went to #5, and they had a few more top 40 hits. There was a lot of assembly line songwriting in this era. Why? Because Brill Building. Because Goffin and King, and all that, some amazing songwriting. There was the teen identity, as I mentioned. They transitioned from that more adult-oriented kind of Andrew Sisters thing to more teen-oriented identity as a group. Emotional storytelling. Leader of the Pack, He's a Rebel, and those are stories. Early versions of archetypes in band members, lead singer, background harmonies, slightly, personalities didn't really pop out at this point, but you started to get a flavor if you knew the band well enough of who had what personality. Generally, though, it was a group image. As I'm saying this, I'm realizing that this prehistory became a history, and I didn't really label it as such. Again, that's how different the trajectory of girl groups was and is from boy bands. Just keep that in mind, though, that if I said prehistory, this is more the history, at this point, especially when we got into the late 50s and into the 60s. But now we're in the 70s. Soul, disco, and funk and all of that. Girl groups continued soul and pop and moved into disco and funk. In many ways, this was a revival period for them, as girl groups were overall not as popular in the second half of the 60s, with of course, the exception of the Supremes. Again, there's no way to cover all of the groups in any of these eras, and very much including this one, primarily because there were so many disco girl groups. I'm not going to cover all of them, but I will cover some. And here's a pretty representative list. You have the Ordettes, who are also known as the Bluebells, who are also known as Patti LaBelle and the Bluebells, who by 1971 were just known as LaBelle. And they started in 1958 and went to 1976. They had R&B, they had funk, rock, some glam even, some progressive soul. They had a great sound overall, and they're from Philly, yo! My hometown, originally. It was a weird case because they started so early. They started, again, in the late 50s and actually had their first hit single in 1962, I Sold My Heart to the Junk Man, went to number 15. I listened to it. It's a cool song. I had never heard it before. And they had a few more charting hits during that period before, falling off a little and changing their name and sound in the early 70s. To LaBelle. And then, of course, they had their big hit, Lady Marmalade, which went number 1 in 1974. They had lots of albums in the 60s. Then they had 6 albums in the 1970s after their name change. Nightbirds hit number 7 in 1974. It was their most successful. And there were one during their reunion in 2008. All the band members had solo careers, of course. Patti LaBelle did. And again, bonus MXtra, patreon.com/music is not a genre. I'll talk about Patti LaBelle. Even Nona Hendrix had a respectable kind of avant-garde kind of run. Then we have the 3 Degrees, 1963 to present. One of the things that's more in common in girl groups, in early girl groups, than in early doo-wop and those kind of groups for the boys, is that more of them are still together, I think, to this day than the boy bands. Slightly more anyway. Again, they started earlier as expected. Again, from Philly, yo. They had charting hits starting in 1965 with that song, Maybe, number 29 in 1970. Different song. But their banner success was in 1974 with the number 1 TSOP, The Sounds of Philadelphia. Well, MFSB was featured the 3 Degrees on their hit. You'd know it if you heard it. It's a great kind of proto-disco instrumental with their singing in the background. And they had number 2 hit, When Will I See You Again? You might know this one too, actually, if you heard it. I did and didn't realize I knew it. They're still going, though all the members are different than the original, and they've changed quite a bit over the years. Honeycone. Cone. C-O-N-E, from 1968 to 1973, then a few reunions, and then they reformed in 2023 and are still going. It's an LA band formed by Edna Wright, sister of Darlene Love, with Carolyn Wills and Shelley Clark. The latter is who reformed the band, Shelley Clark. They had 4 albums, 1970 to 72, all R&B chart hits. Soulful Tapestry hit number 72 Maine in 1971. They had some charting singles 69 to 70, and then 71 to 72 was their big period, scoring number 1 Want Ads, number 11 Stick Up, number 15 One Monkey Don't Stop No Show, and number 23 The Day I Found Myself. Nice run of hits there. I'd never heard of Honeycomb ever until I did this research, but I really like their sound. It's like a female version of that era of the Jackson 5. Look up Honeycone, C-O-N-E, again, C-O-N-E, like an ice cream cone. Look them up and listen to those songs I mentioned. And then we have the Pointer Sisters, 1969 to present, from Oakland, California. I'm not going to say much. Why? I already did an entire episode on them. They are absolute pioneers, absolutely versatile, amazing. Their range of music, how many hits they had in the 70s and 80s in particular. First hit was in 1973 through 1987. They had quite a run, and again, still going as live performers anyway. Look up my episode on the Pointer Sisters to learn more about them. Now, we get to that dun-da-dun suspense thing that I mentioned before. And yes, this first half is going quite over a half hour. Why? It's a longer episode, as I mentioned. We have a group called The Emotions. They were formerly the Hutchinson Sunbeams. They changed their name in 1969 and had their biggest success in the 1970s. They're from Chicago. They had 9 albums from 69 to 85. The album Rejoice in 1977 hit number 7 on the main charts and number 1 on the R&B charts. The albums right before and after also charted very well, were successful. They started releasing singles in 1964 under the Hutchinson Sunbeams name. Once they changed their name, they started having even more success. They had a top 40 song in 1969, So I Can Love You. They had a few charting hits in the 1970s, and then they had the smash, Whoa, whoa, You Got the Best of My Love. That was terrible. Number 1 hit in 1977. Again, started so freaking early, and 1977 had their first number 1 hit. They also had Boogie Wonderland with Earth, Wind, and Fire, was a 1979 number 6 hit. Wanda is still with them, and they're still releasing singles at least up to 2020. But when you look them up, especially on streaming, when you look up The Emotions, beware, because just like with other lesser-known artists, including That's How It Used to Be with my catalog, although I was able to fix that. Their catalog is mixed up with another band called The Emotions that was a reggae band. I'm pretty sure you can tell who's who by listening. Now we get to a favorite of mine, which, by the way, in the conclusions, I'll tell you all my favorites. 1965 to 2020, the band Sister Sledge. They're a soul, disco, pop, rock band. They're also from Philly, yo. 10 albums from 1975 to 2003, with 1979's We Are Family. Hey, hey, yeah. The most successful number 3 album. And their next 2 albums hit number 31, number 42. They had singles from 1971 to 1993 with, of course, We Are Family is their biggest hit, on number 2 in 1979. Also, He's the Greatest Dancer went number 9 that year. And then My Guy, number 23 in 1982. So decent. So pretty into the 70s, just like with the boy bands, very interesting in the development of girl groups, because you did have that quality of R&B in the early girl groups from the very beginning, even slightly before in their proto era as they were developing, but really when they began in earnest in the mid-late 50s, that was always present, mixed with pop and other forms of music. In the 70s, they doubled down on the soulfulness of that music, and the pop was still there too, in many ways, but that kind of back and forth would keep happening. And as you'll see in the next era, which we're going to do a bit of before we take a break, because it's going to be like a 75, 80 minute episode, by the way, you'll see how some of the pop came back, but there was still R&B, and in the 90s, and then it would be mix, and back and forth, and factions and things like that until we get to a much later era, which I'm not going to spoil that. One of the things that became central to girl groups in the 70s was dance ability. Something that was happening with boy bands as well. It was a key step in establishing what would eventually become the new girl group template. Let's do a little bit of the 1980s, transitioning to modern pop and rock. Though female bands in the 1980s weren't really seen as girl groups per se, what they added to that lineage in music in general is seminal. And they can be divided into 2 broad categories. Dance-oriented, so more electronic, and mostly just vocalists, it's doing not just, but vocalists singing with session musicians and other, touring musicians and electronic music. And then rock-oriented and bands who played their own instruments, though of course there was crossover between those two. Those sounds would merge in the next decade and beyond to create the quintessential modern girl group sound. But for now, they were relatively divided. Here's a broad sampling of groups from this decade. And again, let's do just a couple here before we pop off. The Pointer Sisters. Dang. They were even more impactful here than in their also incredibly successful 1970s, which is why I'm mentioning them again and again. I did a whole episode on them. So, and if you don't know 1980s Pointer Sisters hit, then you don't know music history. And hopefully you will watch that episode of mine or listen to it on the Pointer Sisters. But just know that they needed to be mentioned a second time. That's how huge and influential and important they are. And then you have a band, Climax, spelled K-L-Y-M-A-X-X, 1979 to 94. Then reformed in 2003 and are still going. They're an LA band, mixing R&B and dance and pop. Very few people would know their name these days. But I say that because I forgot their name. Now that I have done the research and heard their songs again, etc., and I'll get to that in a second, I now remember knowing their name back then. But you, either way, would for sure know their hits. They had 7 albums from 1981 to 94, with Meeting in the Ladies' Room, I'll Be Back Real Soon. 1984 was their most successful album, number 18. They had singles starting in that year as well, but not really hitting in that year, meaning 1981. Did not hit in the charts until 1984, and they had several top 10 on the R&B charts, including my favorite, which was Meeting in the Ladies' Room was a close favorite, but my real favorite was The Men All Pause. When I walk into the room, I said The Men All Pause. Whoa. Number 5, R&B hit. Only went to number 105 Maine, but come on. It was way more popular than that. Of course, I was DJing in that decade, so maybe that's why I knew it better. Followed by the title track of their hit album, Meeting in the Ladies' Room, which went to number 4 R&B and number 59 Main. But their biggest hit was number 5, I Miss You, No Other Way to Say It, and I Can't Deny It, in 1985, number 5 hit. Then 2 more top 20 main hits. Along with them, you have a group that you should know, which is the Mary Jane Girls. They started in 81, went through 87, then a little bit in the 90s, and then 2010 they reformed and are still going. They're another LA band formed by Rick James to be his backing group, sang with him quite a bit. They had a similar sound to Climax. They had 3 albums, 2 in 1983, and 1 in 1985, which was the number 18 album, Only For You, F-O-U-R. They had one in 24, I'm sorry. They had 3 albums total. 1 in 1983, 1 in 85, which I mentioned, and then 1 in 2014. It's kind of a comeback album. They had several charting hits on R&B and the first half of the 80s. The one I still love right now, one of my favorites is the number 7 R&B hit in 1985, In My House, In My House. Then 2 more top 50 hits. I'm glad they're still going. But that one big hit alone, In My House, makes them worthy of being on this list and everything they did with Rick James. Now, slightly different kind of band. And I think after I don't know. We'll see how far we go. I'm not at the halfway point yet, people. Enjoying the mega episode of Girl Groups. Bananarama, 1980. And they never broke up. They've been going since 1980, so 46 years. London-based band featuring Irish and British members. They're probably the most representative of the new wave faction of girl groups that are popping up now and will contribute elements to the future girl group sound that were essential. Pop, dance, high energy, and that's NRG. 12 albums, 1983 to 2022 so far, and I enjoyed that 2022 album quite a bit. That's when I rediscovered them. 5 of those albums were the top 40 in the UK, with their Deep Sea Skiving went number 7 in 1983 and their eponymous number 16 in 1984. 3 others were top 50 there. Their first 4 albums all charted in the US at number 63, number 30. True Confessions hit number 15, and Wow with an exclamation point at number 44. They started releasing singles in 1981 and continued until 2025, which means they'll probably put out singles this year too. So I like their new stuff, by the way. Very Eurodance. Good. Very, very good. They're still at it, man. They're still at it in a very high quality way. They have many top 10 UK singles and also quite a few top 20 US dance. And of course, their biggest US main hits were Cruel, Cruel Summer, Leaving Me Here on My Own, number 9 in 1983. And it's my favorite of theirs. But their cover of Venus in 1986, which went to number 1, is also a strong contender for fave. And on a par with the Bangles hit cover, Hazy Shade of Winter. I heard a rumor that say you had a broken heart, went number 4 in 1987. So damn good. Several others lower charted. But check out 2024's song Supernova. I think you really enjoy it. And then Expose. If you know 80s dance stuff, you know Expose. 1984 to 96. And then reformed in 2003 and are still going. They're from Miami. Freestyle, techno, dance, pop. 3 albums from 87 to 92. The first hit number 16, the second hit number 33. They had singles starting in 1985, Point of No Return. Taking me to the point of no return. Okay, never mind. Number 1 US dance hit. And number 5 main on its re-record and re-release 2 years later in 87. I spun this as a DJ and I still love it. They had several number 1 and top 5 to 20 US dance hits, the last being in 1995, but also 8 top 10 main hits. 8 top 10 main hits. Expose and a few others that charted high, including Come Go With Me, number 5 in 87. Let Me Be the One, number 7 in that year. The smash Seasons Change, number 1 in 87, 3 more top 10 in 89, and a number 8 in 1983. I remember almost all of them. They embodied the mid-80s dance sound, I think, more than any other band. dance pop, and 100% foretold where girl groups would be headed in the 90s. Those 90s and some of the 2000s girl groups and then beyond, even in the K-pop, I think were heavily influenced by Expose. So I think we're going to stop there. It seems like a good point to tell you that we are finally at the halfway point. And we'll be back in a minute to continue the 80s, but on a slightly different tack. Hey, MXG fans, thank you as always for watching and listening. Listeners, go to youtube.com/@musicisnotagenre. You get a video for every episode of this podcast. Watchers, go to nickdamadio.com/musicisnotagenre if you would rather just listen. And everyone, please take some time out to go to patreon.com/musicisnotagenre to support this podcast, my band rec, and everything I do for as little as $1 a month. Speaking of everything I do, nickdamadio.com really does have it all. If you're interested in unique and quirky t-shirts that I've all personally hand designed, go to nickdamadio.com/shop and you can find it all there, including discounts if you sign up for my newsletter or Patreon. If you're someone who's always wanted to write a song, has just never figured out how to get there, let me work with you. I am the Song Coach. Go to nickdamadio.com/thesongcoach, and whether you're a complete beginner or completely advanced, I can get you there. You can book a free 30-minute call right there on the site. And of course, I am always releasing new music. Go to nickdamadio.com/music to find it all. My complete discography is there. All of the social links are there. And of course, please like, share, subscribe, rate, review. Do it for the podcast. Do it for the music. Sharing is especially valuable to all of us indie creators. I really appreciate your support, your eyes and ears. Thank you for hanging with me for this mid-roll, and let's get back to the show. All right, we are back with this mega episode on girl groups. We're continuing with the 1980s. And a side note, before I do these last three bands, this is, of course, about girl groups. Not all female rock bands or other all-female music groups. As much as I would love to do, I've done some on that. I'm going to do more. That's not what this episode is. It's why I didn't mention Fanny or the Runaways and all of those. It's the same way I didn't mention rock groups in the boy band episodes. I think because of their hybrid status as a kick-ass rock band and a pop band, these next two bands deserve mention in this episode. So again, these aren't really girl groups. These are groups made up of women who did rock and pop, but they deserve mention here because of their status and importance and how they did influence the sound later on. And of course, first, the Go-Go's. 1987 to 85, some reunions. Then 1999 to 2022. And then last year to now, I guess, I don't know, they keep breaking up and getting back together. Another LA band. They were pop punk, power pop, new wave. Of course, Belinda Carlisle, Jane Weidlin, I don't know. Charlotte Caffey, Gina Shock, and Kathy Valentine. They had 3 albums from 81 to 84, all top 20. Beauty and the Beat hit number 1. Vacation at number 8. Their 4th album in 2001 hit number 57. They had singles starting in 1980. Number 20, Our Lips Are Sealed, 1981. Number 2, We Got the Beat, which we've done a cover of actually, same year. Number 8, Vacation. Vacation's all I ever want to, I don't need to sing that. 1982. Head Over Heels, number 11, 1984, so great. And a handful of others. They had outlier singles in 2001 and 2020, and I think the 2020 single was pretty damn good. Also, their documentary was decent. Not amazing, but pretty damn good. If you want to know more about them, yes. If you want to know more in-depth stuff, no, but still worth seeing. The Bangles would be the next one. Started in 81, went to 89, reformed in 1998, and are still together. Another band from LA, legendary power pop new wave rock band. Of course, Susanna Hoffs, Debbie and Vicky Peterson, Michael Steele, yes, a woman as well, and originally from the Runaways, and Annette Zelinskis. But all but Michael Steele are still with the band. Another band I could easily do a full episode on, and I might, because they are one of my favorites, honestly. 3 albums during their first run, but starting in not until 1984, with their second and third albums hitting number 2 and number 15. They had 2 more albums so far during this current run from 1998. Singles starting in 1981, but did not hit the charts until 85's song, Prince penned song, Just Another Manic Monday, ooh, number 2. They have 5 top 5 songs and 3 more in the top 30. Of course, number 1's Walk Like an Egyptian is probably one reason why you know them, 1986. And number 2, their cover of Hazy Shade of Winter, 1987, insanely amazing. Better than the original in my mind. Number 5, In Your Room, 1988. And the number 1 hit that you may know them from better than any others, I guess. I don't know. They had more than one number 1. Eternal Flame in 1989. Salt and Pepper, 1985 to 2002, reformed in 2005 and are still going. Again, like the other 2 bands I just mentioned, not strictly a girl group, but what they did for hip-hop is similar to what the other 2 did for rock, pop, and punk. Showed that women could kick ass doing it and be successful at it. And as important, if not more important, their Salt and Pepper's sound and style very, very much informed future girl groups. And of course, Salt, Cheryl James, Peppa, Sandra Denton, and DJ Spinderella, Deirdre Roper. Jeez, was that a tongue twister? No, but I made it sound like one. They did 5 albums from 86 to 97. All were U.S. top 40 and R&B top 20, with 1993's Very Necessary going to number 4 in the U.S. main charts. They had singles from 1985 to 99. The first to land was Push It, number 19 in 1987. And they had a few top 30 after that. And then Let's Talk About Sex, Baby, and number 13, 1991. But then came 1993's Shoop, number 4. And What a Man, number 3. In Vogue, I think, as well. Immortalized them. Those songs immortalized them. And then Salt and Pepper weren't just, they were from an era. They were Salt and frickin' Pepper and still are. And they had a few more top 50 singles through the decade of the 90s. Which, by the way, is where we are. The 1990s. The modern girl group blueprint started here. You had the girl group blueprint from the 50s and 60s, which lasted for that period and then sort of petered out and went away. It was morphed a little bit in the 70s with soul and disco. But then when the 80s hit, things were being reinvented, just as they were with the boy bands. And then but they weren't strictly speaking in a girl group era. When the 90s hit, that's when it really started to come back. This is the structural modernization era, all right? They became globally engineered pop products as opposed to just bands coming together. Well, now there were pop products, of course, in the late 50s and 60s. Some of those bands were, again, homegrown, came together themselves, sisters and friends, and others were put together by committee, by audition, by record companies. This really, again, this 90s is the second golden age after the late 50s to early 60s. And of course, no way to cover all the bands from this era either. It started much more on the R&B side, and by the end of the 90s was much more pop and dance, though R&B never went away and in fact came back hugely after that. You have a band that if you don't know, you weren't really into this music in that era, SWV, from 88 to 98, and then reformed in 2005 and are still going. An NYC trio, starting as a gospel group and transitioning to R&B and new jack and soul and hip-hop. They have 4 albums during their first run. The first 2 went top 10, and their third, number 24 on the main charts, and all reached top 5 on the R&B charts. They had a 2012 album that went number 25 main and number 6 R&B, and a 2016 album that was 80 main and 11 R&B. So that's charting through the 2010s. Singles from 92 to 98, and then a few in the 2010s. They had 4 top 6 main hits, including the number 6, I'm So Into You, and then number 1, Weak, which is the song I knew from them. I don't know all the words. And the number 2, Right Here, Human Nature, which uses Michael Jackson's song in the bag and interpolates that. All in 1993. So I'm So Into You, number 6, number 1, Weak, number 2, Right Here, Human Nature, all 93. Some solid hits in 96 and 97 as well. And then one more in 1998, the number 25 and number 7 on the R&B charts. They had 9 top 10 R&B charts, including 3 number 1. And I do again remember Weak and Right Here. Very early 90s R&B, but leaning towards the upcoming neo-soul movement. And then Legends and Vogue, 1989 to present, an Oakland band like the Pointer Sisters. R&B, new jack, funky pop, hip hop, mixes, rock in there too. Terry Ellis, Dawn Robinson, Cindy Herron, and Maxine Jones, 3 of which are still with the band. Dawn left in 1997. 6 albums from 1990 to 2004, and then another one in 2018. Both Funky Divas and EV3 reached number 8 in the U.S. charts. They were impossible to avoid in the early 90s. They were really, to my mind, as a girl group, we're not talking Salt and Pepper and all the ones that were kind of not quite girl groups, but as a girl group, En Vogue was really the breakout of that era, I believe. 1990, Hold On to Your Love went number 2. My favorite still. Though 1992's You're Never Gonna Get It, My Lovin', You're Never Gonna Get It, went to number 2 as a close second. Giving Him Something He Can Feel, that kind of retro throwback, number 6 was great. Free Your Mind and the Rest Will Follow, taking off of George Clinton. Number 8, legendary, but at the time, I actually didn't love it. More top 40 hits, and then 1993, What a Man, which I mentioned before, number 3. Don't Let Go went to number 2 in 1996, and then they had some other charting hits through 2000, and then a handful of singles since then, a few of which charted on the U.S. adult R&B. So good for them, you know. And then another legendary band, TLC, 1990 to They Never Broke Up. They're still going. They never broke up. It was Tion T. Boz Watkins, Lisa Left Eye Lopes, who died in a car crash 2002, if you remember, and Razonda Chili Thomas. They're from Atlanta. They're R&B and pop and new jack. 5 albums, 4 through 2002, and then 1 more in 2017. All went top 40 U.S., and Fan Mail hit number 1 in 1999. Out of the gate, though, in 1991 with a number 6 single, Ain't Too Proud to Beg. They had 2 more top 10 and 1 top 30, all in 1992. But their singles run from 94 to 99 is still iconic. 4 number 1s, Creep, Waterfalls, No Scrubs, and Unpretty. And the other 2 top 5 in that era. Other singles in the 2000s, including Girl Talk in 2002, went to number 28. Singles in the 2010s that did not chart, but good for them. Along with En Vogue, they ushered in the new decade of girl groups. And then you have Escape, 1990 to 2000, then a little mini reunion, and then 2017 to present. Also from Atlanta, they're an R&B hip-hop soul group. Candy Brush, Tamara Coggins, Tamika Tiny Cottle, Latasha Scott, and Tamika Scott. Coggins left after a year, and Scott left in 1999. But the rest of them, I guess the reunion, they're together. 3 albums from 93 to 98, all of which hit top 30 U.S. main and top 6 R&B. Singles from 93 to 98, and then 3 others in 2005 and 2017 that didn't chart. But from that 93, Just Kicking It, number 2. Understanding in that same year went to number 8. Both went to number 1 R&B. Then a few so-so charting, and then Who Can I Run To in 95 went to number 8, again number 1 R&B, and in 1998 2 more top 10 singles which hit top 5 R&B. A very mellow 90s R&B sound. I don't remember the songs. This wouldn't have been a sound I was into, but if you want to learn about girl groups in the 90s, you got to know about Escape, which is, by the way, X and then Scape. All Saints, 1993 to 2001, a little bit in the 2000s, and then 2013 to 2022. Originally from, they were from London, and they were originally Melanie Blatt, Shaznay Lewis, and Simone Rainford. And then they were joined by sisters Nicole and Natalie Appleton in 1996. They're pop R&B in the vein of like a kind of a mellower, more ambient Spice Girls. I had remembered hearing of them, but didn't really know their music until I researched here. 5 albums during all of their periods. 3 UK top 3, also a top 40 and a 15. Their debut eponymous album hit US charts in 1997. At number 40, though, pretty respectable. Singles also in all of their eras. They didn't really make a splash until 1997. I Know Where It's At, which hit number 4 UK and number 36 US. Never Ever was their first of 5 UK number 1 hits. Hello, so they need to be mentioned here. And also went to number 4 in the US. Those were only 2. The only 2 to chart in the US was I Know Where It's At and Never Ever. But overall, they had 8 top 10 UK hits, most of them in the top 5. Speaking of UK, I'm talking about the 90s, and I'm talking about girl groups, and I'm talking about the Spice Girls. 1994 to 2000, and and then a bunch of reunions. From London, electropop, dance pop. If you don't know, why am I talking about them like you don't know them? There was Mel B, Scary Spice, Melanie C, Sporty Spice, Emma Bunton, Baby Spice, Jerry Halliwell, Ginger Spice, and Victoria Beckham, Posh Spice. They had 3 albums. Number 1, first album, then number 3, then number 39 in the U.S. But in the U.K., their 3 albums went number 1, and number 2. Hard to explain to anyone who didn't live through it how big they were when their first single, Wannabe, came out in 1996. It was a breath of fresh air among the post-grunge echoes of the earlier part of the decade. It went to number 1 in every country. Every country. The first of 9 number 1s in the UK as well. 9. As well as a number 2, Say You'll Be There in the US, which number 3 in the US. 2 Become One was number 4 in the US. They had 4 more top 20 US hits through 1998. They were huge for longer than you might remember. I mean, it was only 3 years, but there were a lot of hits. They burned out relatively quickly, but their impact, undeniable. Every girl group who came after Spice Girls has used that template in sound and style and the dancing and how the members are individual. You can say that some of these bands I mentioned had members with some individuality, but most, until now, did not. Until right now, I mean, when you have Scary Spice, Sporty Spice, they're going out of their way to delineate who's who and the different personalities and all different looks and stuff. Other than that, if you don't know Spice Girls, look them up. And if you don't know this band, look them up too. But I gotta cover them. Destiny's Child. They've actually formed in 1990, but they didn't really get going until 1997, and then they broke up in 2006 and have had a few reunions since then. They're from Houston. Started as called Girls Time, Tyme. We're a quartet. The original quartet was Beyonce, Kelly Rowland, Latavia Robertson. There's no T in that. And LaToya Luckett. And they changed their name when they were signed in 1996 to Destiny's Child. Robertson and Luckett were replaced by Michelle Williams and Farrah Franklin in 2000, but Franklin quit shortly thereafter. And thus you have the famed trio, which was Beyonce, Rowland, and Michelle Williams. They have 5 studio albums, 1998 to 2004. Sequentially, they went in the U.S. charts, 67, number 5, number 1, Survivor, number 34, and number 2. Singles from 1997 to 2005. Their first single, No, 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 hit number 3 in 1997. And then they had 4 number 1s, starting with Bills, Bills, Bills in 1999. Also Say My Name and Independent Women Part 1 in 2000. And Bootylicious in 2001. Survivor also reached number 2 that year. And several others reached number 3 through 2004. So again, this is just a mega iconic band in the vein of really... the Supremes, maybe the first band. I would say that the Spice Girls and then this band were the first 2 to really rival the Supremes for bigness. You can decide who won that battle, if anybody. They really upped their game from the precursors. I mean, you got to give it to TLC and SWV and all those bands and Escape. But oh my God, when Destiny's Child came along, it was a new phase. They had a hiatus before their last album. They broke up officially in 2006. And of course, Beyonce and Kelly Rowland both had solo careers. And again, check out the bonus M Extra at patreon.com/musicisnotagenre to hear about those solo careers and others. That was the 90s. Empowerment became a central message in the 90s, even more so than in any other era for girl groups. Up until then, of course, that would continue after that. Heavy polish in the production in the 90s as well, which was a different thing. Now we get to the 2000s. You have pop R&B dominance. The industry was refining what it meant to be in a girl group. They became tightly integrated with pop and R&B and hip-hop production, for sure. It's sort of like when boy bands, they existed, boom, and then New Edition came along and added rap, and then every subsequent boy band, almost every, not quite, had rap to some degree until the rock boy bands came along. When the 90s hit, same thing. And again, Salt and Pepper, not a girl group. You have to give them credit for adding that to the mix in their own way. But it was when the 2000s where it became kind of a thing to say you had to have it, Destiny's Child really phased in this decade and maintained a strong presence for the first half. As for the 2000s proper, reality competitions were really kicking off. And like with boy bands and solo artists, many girl groups were formed from them. And like with boy bands, the early to mid 2000s were not the strongest time for most girl groups. Let's name them. Atomic Kitten, 1998 to 2004, and then 2012 to 2024. They were from Liverpool, a dance pop trio and sometimes a quartet. There's Kerry Katona, Liz McLarnon, and Natasha Hamilton. Jenny Frost went in and out. They had 3 albums from 2000 to 2003. The first 2 hit #1 in the UK and the third hit #5. None of them charted in the US, and they never really made it here. That's why I've never heard of Atomic Kitten. You probably haven't either. Almost every single, including the one in 2021, made the top 20 UK. So they deserve mention. Most of them were in the top 10, and they had 3 #1s. Whole Again in 2001, their cover of Eternal Flame in that year, and then The Tide is High, Get the Feeling in 2002. And yes, that's another cover, or an interpolation anyway. Kind of laid back for a dance band, Atomic Kitten. It's probably why they didn't quite make it in the States. But huge in UK. Sugar Babes, 1998 to present. They were, again, London this time. Pop, R&B with some EDM and rock. Really nice sound, honestly. Originally and currently, Mutia Buena, Keisha Buchanan, and Siobhan Donaghy. Some personnel shifts in the middle, but they were the main ones in the beginning and now. They had 8 albums, 2000 to 2010, and 1 more in 2022. All but the last one hit top 20 UK, most of them in the top 3. And 2 hit #1 in 2006 and 2007. They had singles 2000 until last year, so probably more coming. All up until 2010, hit the top 40 UK. So what a run, with most of them in the top 20, including 6 #1s. Their 2003 #1, Hole in the Head, was the only one to chart in the US at number 96. So again, probably why we don't know Sugar Babes. I like their sound way better than Atomic Kitten, honestly. Recommend the song Freak Like Me, their first #1. Pussycat Dolls, had heard of. In 2003 to 10, 2019 to 2022, and then reformed this year. They're touring this year. An LA R&B pop dance band. Originally Nicole Scherzinger, Carmet Bakar, I guess, Ashley Roberts, Jessica Suda, Melody Thornton, and Kimberly Wyatt. It's currently now Nicole, Ashley, and Kimberly. They had only 2 albums, 2005's PCD, Pussycat Dolls, #5, and 2008's Doll Domination, #4. Singles from 2005 to 9, and 1 in 2020, and 1 this year. 7 top 20 US hits, including their highest charting, Don't Ya, which went to #2 in 2005 with Busta Rhymes. I prefer the song Buttons with Snoop in #3 hit in 2006. And I also prefer When I Grow Up, which went to #9 in 2008. This year's single, Club Song, also very good. Very good and very consistent sound update. And I have to imagine that they were part of Spice Girls, but them in the more modern era were part of the kind of girl group contingent that added that quote-unquote doll aesthetic to girl groups that K-pop would take up in a big way. Okay, speaking of reality shows, Danity Kane, 2005 to 9 with some stints since then, and then 2025 to now. I guess they reformed. An NYC R&B hip-hop and dance quintet, Aubrey O'Day, Andrea Fimbrace, I don't know, D Woods, Shannon Becks, Dawn Richard. I'm going to mispronounce a ton of things, and I already have. The latter 2 are not part of the current lineup, but the rest are. They formed on season 3 of Making the Band. 3 albums, 2 in their first run in 06 and 08. Both went to #1, Danity Kane. Third album in 2014 went to #44. They've only had 9 singles in total. Showstopper went to #8 in 06, their highest to chart. #10, Damaged in 08. And no singles after that have charted. I recommend Damaged, though they're not fully my vibe. That's just, some bands just aren't. So that's really it for the 90s. The 2000s. You have producers like Timbaland and that kind of ecosystem of codifying what it meant to produce certain kinds of music, like the way Max Martin did with boy bands, etc. Very tight vocal stacking. Pitch correction really kicked in the 2000s. Radio-ready compression. We know about the loudness wars, the compression wars. As mentioned in my Great Producers of the 2000s episode. Strong emphasis on individual vocal leads within the group identity. Now we get to the 2010s. And yeah, I don't know. I think I cut this right in the middle, right where it should have been. I'm just following a scroll thing bar. 2010s global expansion and K-pop transformation. This is when girl groups become truly global, especially through K-pop. In fact, you're going to notice that only 2 of these bands in the 2010s aren't from South Korea. You also notice that there are far more bands here than in the 2000s. So if the 90s could be considered that second era of peak girl group over from the 1960s, in a way, the 1960s probably still rule as the greatest historically, but the 2010s to now, I think, is rivaling that in every way, almost every way. So, Girls' Generation, from 2007 to 17 and then 2022 to present, they're a K-pop, electro-pop group. They were not mentioned in my K-pop bonus, so I will go into more detail here. Consisting of Taeyeon, Sunny, Tiffany, Hyoyeon, Yuri, Sooyoung, Yuna, and Seohyun. Originally a 9-piece ensemble. Jessica departed in 2014. 7 Korean albums from 2007 to 2022, as well as is characteristic, a few Japanese albums. All but the first was number 1 or number 2 in Korea. 4 of them hit number 1 or 2 in the U.S. world charts, and the last 5 hit top 20 U.S. Heat, whatever that chart is. Singles, from 2007 to 22, 8 number 1s in Korea, including the first one, 2010, and 11 top 10 U.S. world, including Catch Me If You Can, which went to number 2 on that chart in 2015. I like the sound of Girls' Generation overall, as it seems to prefigure where this music would go. I recommend the songs G-E-E, and The Boys. To Anyone, spelled 2, N-E-1, all one word, 2009, 16, and 2024 to present. You have to imagine, again, like with BTS, these girl groups reformed after they broke up because now things are so huge, especially with K-pop Demon Hunter. The members are Bomb, CL, Dara, and Minzy. Similar to the above, but with hip-hop and indie rock added. Only 2 albums in 2010, album went number 1 in Korea, number 7 U.S. world, and 2014's Crush went number 2 Korea and U.S. world, and it went to number 61 on the main charts. Still, I'd never heard of them until I did this research. Their singles through 2017, they had 8 number 1s in Korea, and most others in the top 4. They had several top 10 U.S. worlds, including number 1, I Am the Best, and Goodbye in 2011 and 17, respectively. I prefer this band to the previous band I mentioned, and I recommend the songs I Am the Best and Lonely is a real acoustic contrast to their other sound. Then you have a non-Korean band, Little Mix, number 2011 to 22, a London band, R&B dance pop quartet, Leanne Pinnock, Jade Thirlwall, Perry Edwards, and previously Jesse Nelson. And they became a trio in 2020, though they're on hiatus right now. They were formed on the X Factor, 6 albums through 2020, all top 4 UK, and Glory Days went to number 1. The first 3 went top 20 US, with their first album, DNA, went number 4, and lots of singles. Although I don't remember hearing of Little Mix. 5 number 1s in the UK, spreading out over 10 years. So a good run, including 3 that charted lower in the US. Wings, number 79 in 2012. Black Magic, number 67 in 2015. And Shout Out to My Ex, number 69 in 2016. They're kind of a Spice Girls sound update. And I recommend the song Power because it's different from their usual songs, and I'm honestly not into their sound. But you may like something better from them or something else from them. And then you have a band I had heard of, Fifth Harmony. Formed in 2012 through 2018, and they had a little reunion in 2025. They're from Miami, from the American version of X Factor. Simon Cowell, again, Ace Vengali. Electro-pop R&B, Ali Brooke, Normani, Dinah Jane, Lauren Jauregui, and formerly Jauregui, I don't know, and formerly Camila Cabello. Again, bonus MXtra, patreon.com/music is not a genre for girl group solo artists. I'm going to mention Camila for sure. First band on this 2010s list I had actually heard of. 3 albums in teens, all top 5, several singles, only 4 in the top 40 and 2 in the top 20. By the way, I'm not right. I had heard of Danity Kane too, so it's the second band on this list in this decade I'd heard of, including Worth It, number 12 in 2015, and Work From Home at number 4 in 2016. I remember the song Work From Home, and I recommend it. And I also recommend their number 40 hit from 2014, Sledgehammer. not a Peter Gabriel cover. In general, I like that EDM-ish pop era of the early mid-teens, so I like this band. Red Velvet, formed in 2014 to present, K-pop, very electro dance pop. The members Irene, Seulgi, Wendy, and Joy, and a fifth member, Yeri, joined in 2015. So it's a quintet. 3 albums in 2015, 17, 23, all went number 1 or 2 in Korea. The first 2 went number 1 US World, and the third number 11. Most singles, top 10 in Korea and top 5 US World, including Psycho, went number 2 in Korea and number 1 US World. Kind of laid back. I like Red Flavor, which was number 1 in Korea, number 4 US World in 2017. So listen to Red Flavor from Red Velvet. The last 2 I'll mention in the 2010s, I covered in my special bonus K-pop episode from a couple weeks ago, which I believe I probably will share, I don't know, maybe, or I will either that or I'll share it next week. But I will cover them here again in case you didn't catch it on Patreon, which is where you can catch all the bonus episodes. Keep in mind, my coverage of K-pop is far more extensive at patreon.com/musicisnotaggenre. Big band, Twice. 9-member girl group, started in 2015, still going. Similar to a band called EXO, which they never had a U.S. main chart success. And I'd never heard of them prior to this research, but have scored a ton of U.S. World Top 10s, most of which landed in the top 5. And then they started charting U.S. main in 2021. And their 2025 single Takedown hit number 21. Why? K-pop Demon Hunter. I think the Twice's success will continue because of the run and because K-pop Demon Hunter revitalized K-pop for a certain contingent, even though it never really went away. A Strategy was also featured in that film and also very good. And I also like their song, This Is For. Good band overall. Blackpink, hugely well-known here, K-pop girl group. One of the few I had actually heard of prior. In fact, Fifth Harmony was the only other one maybe that I had heard of from, K-pop. 2016 to present, started charting the U.S. main in 2018 and have had 5 top 40 hits since then. In U.S. main, that's how big they are, including Ice Cream, number 13 in 2020 with Selena Gomez. They continue to release music. Very, very successful still. Probably the only other current K-pop band casual listeners can name besides BTS. If 9 Inch Nails was a pop woman, that's Blackpink. And their rapping is amazing, especially on the song Go, which is a single from this year. Champion is also cool and very different. So the key things in the 2010s, highly synchronized choreography becomes essential. Strong visual identity becomes as important as the music, similar to stuff with the boy bands. And now we get to the 2020s, which what a decade that was. Oh, wait a minute. Or is still. Hyper digital, global, algorithmic. Girl groups now exist inside, TikTok and streaming platforms and ecosystems like every other freaking piece of music. Korea has conquered girl group and conquered group-based pop in general, and this list will prove that. It will also show how, like boy bands, girl groups are multiplying. I covered almost all these in my K-pop episode on patreon.com/musicisnotaggenre, but we'll cover them again here as a courtesy. And again, keep in mind my coverage there is far more extensive, so check it out. The band Flow, FLO, 2019 to present. This is the only band on this 2020s list that is not in any way connected to Korea. The only one. London-based, R&B, Jorge Douglas, Stella Quaresma, and Renee Downer. They put an album out in 2024, which went number 3 in the UK and number 163 in the US. But they have another album coming this July. 14 singles so far. Only ones of note are Cardboard Box, which went to number 76 in the UK in 2022. Fly Girl, featuring Missy freaking Elliott, which went to number 38 in the UK in 2023. And Leak It, which went to number 45 in the UK and number 26 on the US Rhythmic, I don't know what chart that is, this year. So they're apparently heading upwards. It's a real update to the R&B sound, and I really like the singles and their overall sound. FLO. aespa, AESPA, 2020 to present, a girl group known for popularizing the metaverse concept and hyperpop. Haven't had a single chart in the U.S. main, but 7 charted top 10 U.S. world and 2 others just outside of that. Great production. Really like Whiplash and Supernova. So we're talking flow. That's London. When I said no other group was from was unrelated to Korea, aespa included. aespa is K-pop band. IVE, I-V-E, I don't know, it might be pronounced I-V, I don't know. Started in 2021, continuing. Gaeul, An Yujin, Ray, Jang Wanyang, Liz, and Licio. Kind of straight up dance pop. 2 albums, including 1 this year. Number 1 and 2 in Korea. And number 7 and 3 U.S. world. Most singles at number 1 or 2 in Korea, and most are top 10 in the U.S. world, including After Like, number 1 Korea, number 3 U.S. world. Which uses I Will Survive, interpolates that. And this year's Bang Bang, which went to number 2 in Korea and number 6 U.S. world, hyper pop dance spy movie music. Bang Bang is my fave from them. New Jeans, all one word, 2022 to 25, but there's an asterisk there because they're still together and they're going through some kind of legal thing, and I'm sure they'll reform soon. They can be considered a new wave in both music and style, even newer than any previously mentioned, and have had several U.S. main charting singles. I hope they continue. Hope they figure out their issues. Super Shy is a great song from the band New Jeans. And then you have XG 2022 to present from Japan, but based in South Korea. So there's a connection there. Jurin, Chisa, Hinata, Juria, Kokona, Maya, and Harvey. Very hip-hop R&B and a really solid freaking sound. So I guess it's the first I've come across in all my research that's both K-pop and J-pop, maybe? I don't know. But listen to my K-pop episode and I talk about J-pop a little. They put 1 album out this past January, which went to number 13 Korea and number 93 US. Many singles. 2 have charted top 5 in Japan, 2 top 25 in Korea, 3 top 200 in the US, including Woke Up, which is in 2024 went to number 5 in Japan, number 12 in Korea, and number 183 in the US. And I love Woke Up. Also really like Something Ain't Right from 2024, which went to number 161 in the US. And then Les Seraphim. For some reason, Seraphim has 2 S's at the beginning. I think that's kind of cool, and I guess it means angels. 2022 to present. K-pop have had tremendous global success. Not yet on the U.S. main charts, though, but every single top 20 U.S. world, every one, and all but 1 of those in the top 10. Including 3 of them number 1 U.S. world, representing the increasingly international and fashion-oriented direction of K-pop, just like New Jeans. Listen to Spaghetti, very distinctive ambient techno sound, and I also like their song Crazy, so Les Seraphim, Crazy. This last list is a great list to see where is the girl group sound right now. So many good bands. 50/50, 2022 to present, featuring Kina, Chanel Moon, Yiwon, Hana, and Athena. 2 albums, sort of. The compilation The Beginning in 2023 went U.S. World number 5, and the remix album Love Tune Rewired from last year. 9 singles so far, and a 10th is coming soon. Cupid hit number in 2023 at number 7 in Korea, number 2 U.S. World, number 17 on the U.S. Barbie Dreams, featured in the Barbie movie, 50/50 band, a top 10 streamer for them, very bright and chill mostly. I prefer their song Gravity, which is not an official single, but one that's streaming well, and Pookie as well, which went number 33 in Korea last year. Cat's Eye, that's cats with the K, and it's all one word, 2024 to present. LA-based, but Korean connection. Daniela Avanzini, Laura Raj, Manan Bannerman, Megan Skendiel, Sofia Laforteza, and Yuche Jung from South Korea. Members from the Philippines, South Korea, Switzerland, and the U.S., they're often described as a global girl group, which is happening more and more for both boys and girls. No albums yet, but 2 EPs. Beautiful Chaos from last year went to number 4. Wild, scheduled for release this August. 7 singles, 3 top 30, including Gabriella, which went to number 21 last year. Internet, number 29. And Pinky Up, number 28, both of those this year. My fave, though, is Gnarly, which was a number 82 hit in 2025. Much more EDM hyperpop. Gnarly's on my playlist. What I think this latter band shows is 2 things. Number 1 is the U.S. is taking its cues from Korea now, just like with boy bands. And number 2, global membership and reach are becoming paramount. The global market in general is honestly more important than any single country market, including the U.S. It's why action movies, there's so many action movies with very little dialogue, because they translate a lot better globally. More experimentation in the 2020s with sounds and genres. Hyper stylized aesthetics, blending pop, hyperpop, R&B, and EDM. Global fandom. So that's a pretty strong kind of case for the fact that the 2020s is another peak for girl groups, the 2010s to 20s. So the big picture, and I believe this is, we're just kind of going through the, let's call this conclusions. The girl group evolution across eras mirrors boy bands, but with distinct differences. The harmony era in the 20s to the 40s, the girl group explosion, 50s to 60s, still maybe the peak or the first peak for sure. Image and identity and changes in the 70s and 80s. The pop industry machine really kicked off in the 90s and 2000s. And then the more kind of global and K-pop oriented things in the 2010s to today. The 1990s was, though, the modern girl group peak, when you have bands like Spice Girls, TLC, and Destiny's Child. The 2000s, though, you had a real dominance of kind of R&B and pop. The 2010s, the 20s, I will say, may eventually, and maybe already has, rivaled the 90s to the early 2000s as a peak. And I don't know, it may surpass the 1960s. I don't know. So conclusions. The Beatles themselves understood how important girl groups were and are, having covered 5 of girl group songs, 2 by the Shirelles alone. I love those covers. And of course, Harrison's interpolation of the Chiffons' He's So Fine in My Sweet Lord, which got him into a lawsuit. The Chiffons then covered that song in the mid-70s and did a great job and interpolated that with My Sweet Lord. They interpolated My Sweet Lord with their previous hit, He's So Fine. I'd argue that though boy bands on the whole have seen more success, and certainly more in the last 30 years, girl groups have in many ways been more important and influential, and that's in large part because of the solo artists who have emerged from them. The bonus MXtra, patreon.com/music is not a genre, is on those girl group solo artists. I'd also argue that right now, that is in the last 10 years, it's the first time when both boy bands and girl groups are dominating the charts at the same time and nearly at the same rate. That came close in the 90s and early 2000s, but now I think surpasses that. You could argue that was, I'd say bottom line is the musical landscape of the last 60 plus years would be bereft without girl groups. And that doesn't even include all the incredible rock bands and singer-songwriters and all the other genres in which females have shown who run the world. So here are my favorites from each decade. Hard list to make, so a lot of also-rans. From the 50s to 60s, I'm going to go with the Crystals, who did He's a Rebel, to Do Run Run, Then He Kissed Me, and the Shirelles, Will You Love Me Tomorrow, and Soldier Boy. But then later in the 60s, the Supremes, they cannot be denied. The older I get, the more I appreciate the Supremes. 1970s, I can't deny the Pointer Sisters, but for this decade in particular, Sister Sledge is where my heart goes. Philly Yo. In the 1980s was really hard for me. My stealth faves from the 80s are Climax and Expose. My God, was I in love with their music in the 80s. But you can't deny Bananarama and the Bangles as being kind of the queens of that decade. I appreciated the Go-Go's, still love their music, but I don't think they ever quite lived up to their promise. And they were a fave, but not the fave for me in that era. 1990s, the only ones I was really into in that era were En Vogue, and I was pretty into them in the early 90s. But I need to listen more to TLC, and I have to name check the Spice Girls because, of course. And they're one of those things where, I'm indie rock, I'm not going to get into them. But listen, in hindsight, yeah, I was into them even then. 2000s. I would say Destiny's Child, which had more of a 2000s impact for me than they did in the 1990s. And Sugar Babes is a new fave discovery from the 2000s. 2010s, Blackpink, because I've been following them. And To Anyone is another new fave. who I will look into more. 2020s, I'm not sure yet, but right now I'd say the top fave is Cat's Eye, and Flow and XG are strong runners-up. While I have a slight preference for boy bands because I can imagine myself in one, and I've done that music before, both live and recorded, I've always loved girl group music, and the more I listen to, the more I love it. In fact, I tend to put more music from female artists on my playlists these days, usually because they end up being more interesting than their male counterparts. Speaking of more interesting than a man, the featured nothing. Because as mentioned, there is no featured song. I have never covered a girl group song, though I have toyed with it. And so I would not deign to put up one of my songs, as I believe I am a cis male, correct? Yes. Okay. And hey, just listen to the girl group songs I recommended. Questions. Have you been into girl groups at any era, at any point? Did you prefer the classic girl groups of the 60s, or were you more of a 90s, 2000s fan, or are you more into the music right now? I think those are the three peak eras. Were you aware how different their history has been from boy bands? You think girl group solo stars have been as influential as those from boy bands, or even more? What are your favorite girl groups? After these 3 weeks, would you say you prefer girl groups or boy bands, or both, or neither? I'd love to know your answers to all these questions because, as always, my objectives here are music, conversation, and connection. Thank you for hanging with me for the absolute longest single episode ever in the history of Music Is Not a Genre, and I will talk to you next week.